Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to moderate this session today. I'm Benjamin Bellegy. I'm the Executive Director of WINGS, the global network of philanthropy support organizations and philanthropy networks. We're going to discuss a very important topic today, which is the much needed collaboration between private development banks on public development banks, on one side, and private donors and public donors on the other side. As a matter of introduction, I would like to say that financing sustainable development and bringing about the kind of transformation that we need for our economic models is probably one of the greatest challenges that we've ever faced collectively as a humanity. And it's not only about finding the 2.5 trillion in sustainable financing that we need, but it's really about a deeper transformation, a deeper reinvention of our economic models to turn them into models that are able to deliver solid social and environmental outcomes. And we are facing really existential threats right now, especially with the climate emergency. And we all remember the very recent IPCC report that was called Code Red for Humanity by UN Secretary General. So we're also seeing this as a fundamental risk to the global economy. And even very recently, the European Central Bank sounding the alarm on the risk that this represents for the banking sector. And it's not the only global challenge we're facing. We're also seeing a major lack of trust in institutions that is challenging our governance systems at national level, at regional level, and global level. And we know that no single actor can address such massive global issues alone. So therefore, inventing new models for collaboration between actors, between sectors, is really the critical pathway to the kind of transformation that we need. Public development banks are, of course, at the heart of this transformation. They have a critical role to play. They represent 453 institutions that have a mandate to support development in a sustainable way. And they actually provide 10% of total annual investments around the world. So we can see that they have a massive lever here. And it's really interesting and positive to know that last year at the last FiCS conference, they launched a joint declaration that committed public development banks to support the transformation of the economy and societies towards sustainable development and resilient development. In particular, they committed to aligning their financing with the Paris Agreement to move away from coal and to act in favor of biodiversity. On the other hand, donors are playing a really important and complementary role. Public donors with their various tools and channels to support sustainable development, especially where it's most needed, but also private donors. At WINGS, as a global network of philanthropy developers, we're really well positioned to see that there's an incredible potential actually for philanthropy to play a role in this kind of transformation. It's not only about our size or the amount of dollars, because we're a relatively small field with 260,000 foundations distributing $150 billion annually. If you put that in front of course, of the financing gap I was referring to, that's quite limited. But first of all, that amount and these resources can grow with the right investments in the infrastructure that supports giving and philanthropy around the world. And the SDG philanthropy platform giving estimates that we could contribute 651 billion in philanthropic giving for the SDGs by 2030. But it's not just a question, again, of financial resources. Philanthropy can leverage its independence, its flexibility, its ability to take risks, to support innovation. So really, we can see here the complementarity with the massive financial capacity of public development banks. So again, the scale of the issues we're facing tell us we cannot operate in silos anymore. And on the one hand, creating wealth with extractive and destructive practices, and on the other hand, redistributing part of that wealth through public and private mechanisms that address some of the issues that we created. So we have to integrate both. And for this to happen, we need to build bridges between sectors and engage in multi-stakeholder partnerships. So the good news is that we have a common language. We have existing approaches such as blended finance and global goals with the SDG goals and with the Paris Agreement. So we need to build platforms and we need to invest in an infrastructure for collaboration. And our big objectives are converging. I've referred to this declaration from PDBs on climate, and the same thing is happening with private donors, with philanthropy right now with the global commitment that Wings is hosting to push foundations to engage in climate action, which we call philanthropy for climate. So in this context, today's panel will help us explore how we can meet the moment, how we can concretely engage in cross-sectoral collaboration for sustainable development. We know this is not an easy journey, that it takes time, it takes resources, it takes sometimes translation, platforms, but those who will be with us today will really tell us how we can turn this intention into reality. And we have a very eminent panel that represents, of course, private donors, public development banks, and they will share with us their insights and their experiences. So to get us started, we will hear a keynote speech from Mr. Masood Ahmed, the president of the Center for Global Development. He joined the center in January 2017, capping a 35-year career, driving economic development policy initiatives relating to debt, aid effectiveness, trade, and global economic prospects at major international institutions, including the IMF, the World Bank, and the FID. Masood, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, and thanks to the organizers for this and for giving me a chance to share some thoughts. Thank you also, Benjamin, for laying out the broad agenda and in such a comprehensive way. So I'll really just build off that and make a couple of fairly simple points that I hope we can pick up in the conversation. The first point really is that I think we've all recognized now that if you want to make any kind of transformational impact, then all the actors that are involved in supporting development through finance and technical policy support need to be working much more closely together. And as you've laid out, the public development banks have a big role to play in this. We want them to both scale up their own work, but I want to add two other points to what you said. First, we want them to also be the bridge to mobilizing more private financing from commercial private financiers. So people throw around very large numbers, and the numbers are indeed very large. You've got $100 trillion of assets sitting there and the private institutional investors. So and even small fractions of that become very large numbers for development in comparison with the ODA that we have, which is somewhere 150 or a little higher than that, and then private philanthropy roughly the same. So we want them to do that, and we realize that for their ability to leverage private financing, they need to offer sometimes make the terms of financing and projects more affordable by offering also some kind of blended finance with grant support. And the other thing we're asking them to do, public development banks to do more and more, is to get involved in supporting global public goods, pandemic preparedness, pandemic prevention, climate related projects. And again, in many cases, the terms of these projects, the financial terms of these projects need to be made more affordable, more attractive by providing some grant finance. And the flip side of this, and Susanna Moorhead, the chair of DAC, is with us today, the flip side of this has been that all the donors, DAC and others, have been making an effort to increase the amount of financing that they provide from their budgets, grant financing, to support these increased blended finance activities. So they're contributing more and more, and that is only going to grow as we move forward. But my contention, and this is the point I want to put to you, is that this relationship has to be much more than a financial transactional relationship. It really does require much more strategic interaction between the donors and the development banks in terms of what it is that we're trying to work towards and what is the best way to achieve that at the institutional level and at the country level. And we recently in CGD just asked 13 bilateral donors who have development finance institutions also in the same country. How often do they engage with the development finance institutions? How much interaction is there? And I was surprised that almost a half of them said that they meet once a year. And you know, others are meeting every day or every week. So there's a big variation. And I guess my point I want to leave with you is that we have to now transition from thinking of this as a relationship where the donors are providing grants to help make the work of development banks, both their own work and their own leveraging of the private sector, more affordable by grants, but much more joined up approach. And for me, that is what this whole finance in common agenda is all about, because we have to think of finance in common as a way of bringing together all of the actors in defining a common approach and then pursuing it. And not just at the sort of institutional headquarters level, but in the countries as well. And to be able to do that, and this is my last point I want to make with you, is that, you know, to be able to do that, we also need to look at how in countries that are the donor countries and that are also major shareholders in the development banks, how joined up is the tutelage function for these institutions. Often what you find is that one part of a national government is responsible for the bilateral donor agency, but it's not the part that is necessarily overseeing the relationship with the development bank. And what I have seen, you know, in my life is that you go to listen to the representative on the governing body of, say, a bilateral of a UNDP discussion, or then you go to the IMF discussion, then you go to WHO discussion. Representatives from the same government sometimes aren't aligned in terms of what they want from these organizations. So if we want the organizations that we have created internationally to have a joined up agenda, the starting point for that has to be a joined up approach to those organizations inside the capitals, much more so than is the case today. And I think it'd be interesting to get your perspectives on the panel, to whether you think that's important and also whether you think that's feasible. And I very much hope that, you know, in a way, the kind of stuff that we've been seeing recently under Susanna's leadership in the DAC, in trying to get the DAC community to think more about some of this, we can broaden out to also some of the non-DAC donors who are also becoming increasingly important. And I know that a couple of them will be joining this panel and bringing in the private philanthropy into that same conversation, because, you know, 150 billion is not a small number. It is a large number. It can have a huge impact in terms of leveraging. If we think of it not as just another source of financing, but how best can we use that set of financing within a coherent whole so that it's actually having the maximum impact. So let me stop with that. I very much look forward to the panel discussions that we're going to have now. Thank you very much, Benjamin. Back to you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for these insights and for this call to action to really go beyond financial transaction and work on strategic relationships and beyond punctual collaboration, but real integration for a joined up approach. So we'll hear from a fantastic panel today, and I'm sure they'll respond to your question. And I'll just start by introducing them briefly. And we have today with us Francesco Profumo, who is the president of ACRI. ACRI was established in 1912, and it's a national Italian organization that represents foundations of banking origin and saving banks. And so they're publishing he published numerous scholarly papers as a professor of electrical engineering, and even while in the office as Minister of Education, he was also the president of the National Research Council. Right now, he's the chairman of the Fondazione Compagnia di São Paulo, the chairman of the Fondazione Bruno Tech Kessler, and the president of business school ESCP. President of Uni Italia. We will also have with us Tanja Gönner. She's the chair of the management board of the GIZ, the German Development Implementation Organization. Today, she represents the GIZ CPMA, joint presidency of the Practitioners Network for European Development Cooperation, which brings together European bilateral implementing organizations. We will also have Matt Reed, the Global Director of Institutional Partnerships at Aga Khan Foundation. Dr. Matt Reed is the Global Director of these international partnerships. He's coordinating the AKF's work with bilateral, multilateral foundation and corporate partners worldwide. He has been the CEO of AKF in the UK since 2016, and he also led between 2013 and 2016 the foundation work in India as the CEO of the Aga Khan Foundation in India. We will then hear from Luís de Melo Jerónimo. He's the director of the Gulbenkian Sustainable Development since January 2020. Luís has served in the UK branch of the Gulbenkian Foundation for many years, running the Gulbenkian Human Development Program and a portfolio of projects on social innovation and impact investing. He is also a member of the board of directors of the European Venture Philanthropy Association. We will have with us Sirpa Jarvenpaa, the Director for Southeast Asian Energy Transition Partnership. She has an extensive career with the Asian Development Bank of 20 years, focused on infrastructure planning, implementation, policy, and institutional strengthening, including in energy and other infrastructure sectors, as well as in corporate roles, particularly in strategic planning, resource allocation, and mobilization. And we are also very lucky to have today with us Susanna Moorhead, who is the chair of DAC, and we're very honored to have her with us today. And Susanna will make closing remarks and synthesize a bit the insights that everyone on the panel will share. So I will start with the question that will actually ask the same question to our different panelists, and we'll start with Francesco from ACRI. This question is really simply, based on your experience, where do you see the main potential and the ways for collaboration among public development banks and donors? Francesco, the floor is yours. I think you might be on mute. Yes, yeah, we can hear you now. Perfect.
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, good. Then, thank you, Benjamin, for your introduction and for the question. For the international public, it may be useful to explain briefly what the banking foundation are and what they do. It's a unique Italian institution which has also been studied abroad, but is not really well known outside of our country. The foundation we created 30 years ago, following the privatization of savings banks. The privatization created a new philanthropic entity, something that had been sorely lacking in Italy. There are 86 banking foundations of origin in Italy today, spread more or less evenly across the peninsula. They are private and autonomous entities with a total assets of 40 billion euros. Every year, they provided territories with on average almost 1 billion euros to fund social, cultural, and research projects. The role of the foundation is twofold. They are enablers and initiators. Thanks to the autonomy and flexibility enjoyed by the foundations, together with their knowledge of territories and the people, they can play the role of catalysts of resources and skills and enablers of new initiative methodologies, exploring new paths that are difficult for the public administrations to follow, as they are bound to decision-making processes that must take into account the principle of universality. The foundation's approach is based on listening, getting involved, and mobilizing the community living in territories. Thanks to their authorities and their neutrality, the foundation can play the role of coordinator and use their reputation to carry out projects and collaboration in the territories. They are engine of innovation with the resources to stimulate and take part in a wide range of social, cultural, and educational innovations, together with citizens who are themselves in the processes of a social renewal, fulfilling the role assigned to them by the Constitutional Court as stakeholders in the organization of social liberty. As a private entities, the foundation are not subject to the constraints of the public bodies and can initiate and experiment with the innovative projects to test a range of solutions to the various challenges the country is facing. Sometimes it's true, experimentation can lead to mistakes being made, but there can be no real innovation without taking risks and making mistakes. Over 30 years, these widespread trials have resulted in a large number of solutions that work, which can be translated into public policies and implemented on a larger scale with larger budgets. In our experience, the collaboration among public development banks and donors, the roadmap is first, analysis of social needs. Second, foundations launch local initiative as a test. Three, involvement of other partners, public or private, in order to extend it on a national level. That's why we believe the donors can actually support the PDBs in addressing the most pressing challenges of our times, maximizing the social and environmental impact invested. We, as a banking foundation, try to lead by example by sustaining projects can be actually bring to a change and by always looking at ourselves and how we can get better. Moreover, all of our work is based on collaborations. We work with the civil society, private actors, and the governments, and we strongly believe that the results are achieved by working together, allowing everyone to bring in something to be able to enrich, enhance, and contribute to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these remarks. We'll now move on to the second speaker, Tanja Gönner. I'll just mention that since we started just a little bit late, we'll have one round of questions only, and each speaker will have 4 minutes. So if you can also bring, while you present, some concrete examples from your experience of these types of partnerships, then that will be very, very useful. So Tanja, please, the floor is yours on ways to collaborate and experiences also from this technical assistance perspective that you're bringing.
Yes, thank you so much, Benjamin, and a very big thank to the host of this panel discussions. It's really a pleasure to be here. And please let me first start that the Practitioners Network, for whom I'm speaking today, brings together European bilateral implementing organizations with sectoral technical expertise rooted in a range of developing countries, as well as a wide range of experiences in developing partnerships in line with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. And at last year's Finance in Common Summit, the PN made a public declaration on enhancing synergies with PDBs, with the public development banks. We would like to continue to pave the road for more effective impact thought partnership with the PDBs. We believe that multi-stakeholder partnerships with the PDBs are key not only to bridging the SDG investment gap, but also to building back better and to effectively supporting development countries and developing countries. And as BN organizations, our experiences show the importance of evidence-based and inclusive public policies to drive investment. We call it the policy first principle. While the PDBs are on the front line to mitigate the economic consequences of the multidimensional COVID-19 crisis, they can also use the current momentum to change the way they work and be actors of change in line with the SDGs. They have a very important role to play in financing innovations on one hand and small and medium-sized enterprises on the other hand. And on the macro level, we believe it is fundamental that all actors together put emphasis on the purpose of the mobilized finance rather than its source, therefore addressing developing countries' concerns about the quality, composition, and effectiveness of blended sustainable finance. The objective is not only the mobilization of additional resources, as Ahmed Masood mentioned before, but also to ensure accountability and transparency through shared high-level principles and common indicators. In this regard, the work of the OECD DAC on blended finance principles should be capitalized as a shared framework. So is the work on European taxonomy for sustainable activities, which provides a high-level standard encompassing all dimensions of sustainability. Altogether, we need to provide additionality and use blended finance to attract investors to developing countries with a specific attention on LDCs and fragile and conflict-affected states. Through the identification of the development outcomes and standards, we can ensure a role for effective capital allocation in a way that investments maximize the positive contribution towards the SDGs. And I can say PN members, the members of the Practitioners Network, can be a partner at the different stages of the PDBs project cycles by providing technical assistance to help develop sector expertise. And the operational experience of PN organizations and the relevance of the pool of European expertise are important assets to enable PDBs to be projects, to be key promoters of economic and social recovery in the service of quality projects and the achievement of SDGs, as it was mentioned before, on the ground in the countries and not only on the headquarter level. For value-based and innovative international partnerships and in line with the policy first principle, nurturing policy dialogue with partner countries, for example, via European public sector expertise, would assure that technical and financial cooperation actions as well as private sector investments are guided towards impactful development results. And our experience tells us that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Structurally, some PDBs are on lending only, others lend directly to companies. And the different setups of the PDBs suggest different types of collaboration, therefore requiring a tailored approach. On our side, the PN also offers a great variety of actors, including donors, and this is an asset to providing solution to many challenges ahead. And to give some examples, I think that we are involved. I can give you one example. PN members are involved in several projects with financial actors. For instance, the Investment Climate Reform Facility. We provide tailored technical assistance to 6 development banks in the ACP countries. The support covers training on specific financial products and financing structures and advisory services on institutional strengthening. The facility further works with the World Federation of DFIs to build a knowledge hub for PDBs. I could make other examples, but I think then it's too long. And as a conclusion, I think networks like the PN, and we mentioned it before, we should work in networks. Networks as the PN can ensure that a variety of organizations specialized in TA, but also donor organizations, have a structured dialogue with the PDBs in order to finally capitalize on the synergies both aspects of development cooperation can bring to the partner countries. As PDBs are on the front line to mitigate the economic consequences of the health crisis, it is an opportunity for them to play an important role in providing financing and support for unserved and underserved populations. So I think this is the way we can do it together.
Thank you so much, Tanja, and sorry to rush you a little bit. We have so many amazing speakers today. We really want to have a chance to hear from everyone. So now this is the turning to Matt Reed from Aga Khan Foundation, representing a prominent philanthropic organization working globally. So Matt, what is your experience working in collaboration with private development banks?
Thanks very much, and thanks everyone for tuning in today. But let me say a little bit something about the Aga Khan Foundation and the Aga Khan Development Network. We're a collection of 10 agencies focused on economic, social, and cultural development. And on the economic side, it's a for-profit but for development set of agencies that are addressing binding constraints on development and promoting maximum employment in the places where we're active, which is Central and South Asia, Eastern Africa, a bit in the Middle East. And so it's run in a way like an enormous impact investment arm. All the proceeds are reinvested in the group. And then you have the not-for-profit agencies working in social development like health, education, etc. And across that range of work over 50 years, we've worked in many, many different ways with public development banks, all of them, not only Proparco and AFD that are part of this panel and organizers, but all of the others. Now, in that, I think I want to pick up on something that Masood said when he talked about the potential of PDBs to be, bridges and also to have a catalytic role, because I think that's where a lot of private organizations like ours, which include philanthropic arms, have played a role. We've tended to try to do things that would bring actually oftentimes the public development banks into different places, into frontier environments, etc. So there's various ways that we've tried to work. One is a sort of doing preparatory or risk finance, so first loss finance, where we may, to take a live example, we were the private sector financiers behind a thing called the Ruzizi hydropower plant, which is going to provide electricity for Rwanda, DRC, and the Congo. Very, very politically difficult project, but one that has transformational potential. Very few organizations would take on that challenge, but we did it because we felt it was important. And now we brought it to a stage where public development banks can invest. The second kind would be sort of through financial or technical innovation. So for example, our organization was behind the first privately financed public-private partnership in energy in Africa over 20 years ago, which then created a template that now is very, very common to promote infrastructure, investment and innovation around the world. The next, I would say we've done some interesting things around social infrastructure. So are there things that you can do in a not-for-profit basis using blended financing and a kind of output aid approach in order to guarantee social impact, but also to catalyze private sector and social sector funding? And I'd be happy to talk about those examples later. And I think the last area where we've tried to work with the public development banks is around sort of being an aggregator, if you will, of grassroots and community level projects. There are many, many things that we need to do now, for example, in the area of climate change mitigation and adaptation that require work at the village level in places that most public development banks can't think about. The transaction costs are too high. But our organization, with its expertise at the grassroots level, has been able to work with them in a way that brings down their transaction costs, aggregates the benefits of that sort of community action at scale in order to create the kind of impact that we need. So those would be sort of 3 or 4 ways that we've worked with public development banks over the years. I'm happy to talk about them more in the question period.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was very insightful and very useful examples. I'm going now to invite Luís de Melo Jerónimo to share his perspective on the question.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to contribute to this so interesting discussion. I must say that I'm here with 2 hats, not only with the Gulbenkian hat, where I have the privilege to work, but also with the EFC, European Foundation Center, Daphne and EVPA hat. And my remarks will be more on the philanthropy infrastructure and what institutions like EFC, Daphne and EVPA can bring to this so crucial discussion. First, let me just share some figures about what we are talking about when we talk about like European philanthropy. We are talking about roughly 150,000 foundations across Europe, of course, with different sizes, with different missions, but running an annual giving of around 60 billion. But I think more and more where we should be looking at is or about on the amounts that the assets and the endowments that the foundations have under management. And in that regard, we are talking about 500 billion euros. And I think what is being interesting in this journey of philanthropy is that as more and more we realize that the traditional way we are funding via publicly or via traditional philanthropy, the resources that we are deploying are not enough to tackle these complex societal challenges. We need to develop new funding tools, and foundations have been catalytic in developing this different impact investing instruments. And I think it's interesting because at the foundation level, for the first time, we are having conversations between the grant making part of the foundations that have expertise on project management, on impact management, and of course the teams that are more like working on finance and investment that have the expertise on developing and managing this new funding tool. So this is a journey and for the foundations, but more and more, I think what we need to bear in mind is that the foundations are more and more aware and looking forward to find opportunities to unlock the potential of the assets that they have in the mission to under management to better accomplish their mission. And in this regard, what can be the role of organizations like EFC, Daphne, or EVPA? I think they can play three roles. I think one role is basically the convening. I think more and more there are foundations that are willing to step into this game, and these organizations can be actually the conveners between foundations and public development banks. I think they can also be trust builders by sharing information and data about the deals that more and more foundations are doing in this sector. And I think more importantly, they can also bring expertise and work strategically with public development banks in co-designing these tools. And I think what we also need to bear in mind, sometimes when we jump into these discussions, we ended up like being only focused on the instruments and the new funding instruments that we need to deploy, but we need to take into account that these instruments are not like ends in itself, they are means to an end. And more, what we need to take into account and start these discussions is not on like the financial instruments, but actually the issues that we are trying to tackle, how funded or underfunded they are, and start the designing of the instruments on that, and not like based on frameworks that sometimes are not like fitted for the purpose. And that's why this collaboration between foundations, other philanthropic institutions, and public development banks and frontline organizations is critical to develop and co-design these tools. And I'm sure that EFC, Daphne, and EVPA are really looking forward to better engage in more strategically in this discussion with public development banks, so we can together work for a better world and a better planet. I think we need to take into account that we don't simply find investment opportunities or funding opportunities. We need to build them, and that building takes time, and we need to ensure that trust. And that's why this more strategic cooperation between all these stakeholders is critical for our future. So we look forward to continue this discussion with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Luís, for reminding the importance of having a strong infrastructure to create these partnerships. And now I will invite our last speaker of the panel before Susanna closes the session. So we're going now to hear from Sirpa Jarvenpaa, the Director of Southeast Asian Energy Transition Partnership.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Thank you for inviting ETP to this Donors Dialogue. Let me also say just a few words about ETP first. So Southeast Asian Energy Transition Partnership brings together philanthropies and governments to capitalize on their relative strengths in a partnership to accelerate energy transition in Southeast Asia. So Marco, you mentioned that we need a lot of cash, and you mentioned some figures. well, the globally available philanthropy is around 700 billion. We get about maximum 1 to 2% for the purposes of climate and mitigation. So we need more appropriate platforms to bring these kinds of resources into the climate domain. And the reasons why governments and philanthropies join ETP are really many. For instance, reduced costs from blended resources and working together, and coordination benefits that stem from the membership, as well as a greater chance at influence in lean and dedicated secretariat. And one, of course, sort of flagship one for ETP is that we work under the UN flag with the UN Ops as the fund manager, which fosters transparency and neutrality benefits and value for money. So returning to your original question, and also what Masood said, what we are raising is the ambition among the leadership here among us, but also within and outside of the Southeast Asian region, on how partnerships can be more inclusive, more innovative, and become drivers of change themselves. So I can highlight a few examples. For instance, in Indonesia, the government has a number of plans and targets for energy transition on the one hand, but the development partners on the other are preparing massive assistance packages that we heard of earlier in terms of the figures that require engagement with the political partners and keen political will. So ETP is preparing to play a role here to bring the government agencies to a structured communication group with the development partners to conduct regular, deeply issues-driven and result-seeking dialogue to achieve the goal of unified vision for reaching policy adjustments. So this kind of platform will support the World Bank, ADB, AFD, KfW, results-based lending, as well as the entire donor community to deliver on their respective programs under a structured plan for results. My second example is regional. So ETP with World Bank and other partners is preparing an Asian energy transition global platform. This platform will bring together the stakeholders that are standing to be affected by the retirement of coal-fired power plants and mines in the region, both from informal and formal sectors, together to a dialogue and to access learning opportunities and lessons from across the world. ETP here brings focus on the partnership itself in the platform to ensure that no duplication and overlaps occur and the gaps are addressed to enable savings and speedy delivery. In this case, ETP serves as kind of a train station connecting the stakeholders with the services supplied by multiple parties, creating trust through neutrality and confidence and clarity through coordination. And lastly, I want to give an example regarding our membership. So it's very diverse, but also united. ETP draws on the networks of our members and undertakes projects that multilaterals and bilaterals may not be able to, in a way that that Matt mentioned regarding Aga Khan as well. So in Vietnam, ETP finances a very sensitive undertaking to assess the coal abatement options. So ETP inclusively connects with all the engaged international partners to ensure that their work and views are featured in the undertaking, but also ETP ensures that pathways are created for real dialogue with the government parties through strong alliances at local level. So the main message that I have is that ETP is predicated on inclusion and collaboration, and this drives results. It capitalizes on more than the blended money, like Masood said. It's more than only about financing. It's about strategic partnerships. And here we really capitalize on the memberships networks, and we look forward to continuing discussion with all of you on how we can collaborate in energy transition in the Southeast Asian region. Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you very much, Sirpa, for these excellent examples. So we just have 2-3 minutes, and I really want to quickly pass the floor to Susanna Moorhead, the DAC chair, to share her perspective based on everybody's inputs. And thanks everyone for your excellent remarks. Susanna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I don't think I can do the conversation justice in 2 minutes, but I think we all agree it's axiomatic that we can't afford not to collaborate. Lots of examples of good collaboration. I would like to have heard more about why it's so difficult. And I think we need to focus on that. Masood talked about bureaucratic reform. I think that's needed in country, but I think it's also needed within and between multilaterals. You know, there's a huge amount of competition for resources, for space, for visibility. A lot of interesting things said about where the money goes. And I think, I mean, TA is often seen now as being a bit old-fashioned, but certainly in the poorest countries, one of the most common things you hear is where are the bankable projects? And TA can do a huge amount to really force these different sources of finance together. And it's relatively low cost when done well. Yes, we need to make the money go further. The rise in demand, whether it's grant or loans, the concessional finance is going through the roof. We're not going to meet it. Thank you for name checking the DAX blended finance guidance. They're good, they're helpful, they're practical. I think we could do a lot more on guarantees, which are one of the most cost-effective ways of crowding these resources where they don't otherwise want to go. Impact, impact, impact. But again, let's stop competing and really pool our indicators on impact, because it's miserable when you've got to report against several different frameworks. I'd like to have heard more about risk and risk appetite, because I think when you put together donors and diplomats and private banks and the multilaterals, you can really reconfigure risk. And we're not doing nearly enough of that. So we're trying to apply developed world risk models to developing countries. And the answer is never a happy one. And you cannot use ODA purely to buy down other people's risk. That is not going to fly with our taxpayers. Transparency and accountability, really good to hear from the foundations that you're getting better at this. You know, for the donors, you have to be able to write the answer to the parliamentary question for your minister and defend it in Parliament. It's a pretty high bar, but an important one. And it's great to see more of that in other sectors. And I think, I mean, last but not least, this focus on trying to do this in country. There's only so far we can go having a discussion at HQ. But when this really flies is when you get, you know, the foundations, the bilateral donors, the multilaterals, the banks, the government, the politicians sitting around a table, figure out what you're trying to do, how you're going to finance it, and how you're going to pull it all together. So I think that would be my closing point, which is, you know, how can we work together better in country and then aggregate that up, rethink, then peer learning, but particularly about where we get this wrong, because you always learn more from your mistakes than your successes. But thank you very much. Really interesting panel.
Thank you so much, Susanna, for these excellent closing remarks. Thank you all for your insights. I think it shows that we have so much more to share in the coming years and months, and in terms of practice and insights. So let's be in touch, and I hope we have many more conversations of that level in the future. Thank you so much, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin, for your moderation.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Bye.
Thank you,
All the best.
Benjamin. Thank you.